Committee newly constituted to resolve the National Assembly and Senate standoff over what share of national revenue should go to the counties will tomorrow hold its first meeting amid mounting pressure from the National Treasury for counties to contend with a figure of 316.5 billion shillings floated by the National Assembly. And as Moremi Mwangi now reports, the expansion of the committee from 10 in the previous negotiations to 18 as currently constituted is already stirring a skepticism that the two houses may yet again not strike consensus.
From this grand march of governors to the Supreme Court demanding for more money to the counties, to these countrywide protests of county workers over delayed July salaries, the first 7 weeks of this financial year have been quite a trying moment for devolution enthusiasts, as an unprecedented cash crunch hit counties over the prolonged stalemate between the National Assembly and the Senate over what should be the share of national revenue to the counties in the 2019-2020 financial year after collapse of initial mediation efforts in June. And the spotlight yet again turns to Parliament as the newly constituted 18-member mediation team, comprising 9 representatives from each house, begins fresh talks.
We cannot give that which does not exist. Let us take what we have. Ikiongezeka, itaongeza. Lakini jamani, let us just take what we have. What are we arguing about? Because kama ilikuwepo, si tungewapatia.
In the division of revenue bill to be subjected to this mediation, the National Assembly has allocated counties 316.5 billion shillings, a figure the Senate rejected, demanding counties should get 335 billion. An attempt by governors to have the Supreme Court resolve the stalemate flopped after the Chief Justice David Maraga chaired bench directed the two houses to head to mediation as the law dictates. In June, mediation efforts flopped when members of the National Assembly struck to a figure of 316 billion shillings against senators' demand for 327 billion. Newest members to the mediation team from the National Assembly are Amos Kimunya, Junet Mohamed, Mishi Mboko, and David Sankok. New entrants from the Senate are Okongo Omugen, Mithika Linturi, Margaret Kamar, Charles Kibiru, and Rose Nyamunga.
As we speak today, the issues that were in the last mediation have not been resolved. Nobody has moved from where they are. And I expect the mediation to start from where we stopped. From the place we walked out is where that mediation will begin. Yeah, and the membership itself of that committee suggests that we are going to have a very cantankerous process.
The committee members are widely expected to retain the co-chairs as Kikuyu legislator Kimani Ichung'wah and Mandera Senator Mohamed Mahmood. Should mediation talks collapse again, the bill would have to be drafted afresh and subjected to debate in both houses. Further failure to reach consensus between the two houses would take the bill back to mediation, as the cash crunch in the counties continues to bite. Moremi Mwangi, KTN News.
All right, so now that meeting between the National Assembly and senators, the Senate Assembly, of course, the people who've been nominated to sit in that meeting between the two between the two assemblies, is supposed to happen today and not tomorrow, as earlier indicated. So now let's talk to a political affairs reporter, Moremi Mwangi, who's been keeping tabs with this story and is now joining us live from a City Center studios. Moremi, good morning. And of course, it is a meeting that, I mean, all the 47 county governors are actually, you know, their eyes are now on this committee that is expected to find a lasting solution. Are we looking at a situation whereby, you know, the committee members will finally agree that this is the amount that we're supposed to be giving to the county governors?
Well, the spotlight is back in Parliament, particularly after that decision by the Supreme Court from the bench chaired by Chief Justice David Maraga, directing the parties to head back to mediation, since that's what the law dictates. And there have been pronouncements before, either about the government not having money from the national government or from the governors demanding for more money, as well as a crisis in the counties where quite a number of county government workers have downed their tools over delayed July salaries. And therefore, the mediation team heads to talks today with the entire country, looking at them and wondering if this is going to bring closure to what has been a protracted dispute over how much should go to the counties in the current financial year. Remember, the membership of this mediation committee has been increased to 18 from the previous mediation committee that had 10 in the initial mediation talks that collapsed. And therefore, it is a session that we expect to be highly charged, also looking at the caliber of persons that have been added to that committee. On the table for the team to decide is what to do with the suggestion from the National Assembly of 316.5 billion shillings as the shareable revenue to the counties, despite demands by the senators that ought to be increased to 335 billion shillings. You remember from the first division of revenue bill that flopped in mediation talks that initially the National Assembly had suggested 310 billion shillings, but during the debate of that bill at the Senate, the senators stuck to a similar demand for 335 billion shillings. And at the time they said that their justification was the estimates from the Commission on Revenue Allocation on how much should go to the counties in the current financial year. When the two teams went into mediation, there was a bit of ceding of ground, and the members of parliament went up to 314 billion shillings. At some point, the senators also came down, but ultimately, as at the point when the talks collapsed, the figure from the members of parliament was 316 billion, while that of the senators was 327 billion. Therefore, in the republication of the bill, that's when the members of parliament increased that figure to 316.5 billion, but the senators are demanding for 335. It is a session that we expect to be highly charged given the stakes that are here. Members of parliament have said the government doesn't have money, and to justify increasing that figure beyond that would necessitate alterations on the revenue allocated to other arms of government. Brenda.
It's good you're saying that that meeting will be a charged meeting. I mean the meeting between senators and their counterparts at the National Assembly. And when you're talking to, Makueni Senator Mutula Kilonzo, I heard him say that they'll continue their conversation from where they left it. They will not be starting a fresh conversation. So are we looking at a situation whereby senators are likely to lower their demands for the county governments in terms on behalf of the county governments when it comes to funding?
Well, you could say the circumstances are partly different now because the entire team knows they are under pressure. President Uhuru Kenyatta has already spoken on this matter and said his government doesn't have the money to increase that figure beyond what has been suggested by the National Assembly. But there has been a separate push by governors who have made even the effort to go to the Supreme Court over what they say has been a conspiracy between members of parliament and the National Treasury to perpetually ignore advice from the Commission on Revenue Allocation, whose figures on how much should go to the counties are based on parameters that are agreed in law. But there has also been an attack on that commission from members of parliament who say that the CRA appears to be giving governors too much expectations and therefore perpetually setting up senators against members of parliament in the fight on how much should go to the national government as compared to what should go to the counties. And this stalemate that persists now has elicited a separate discourse on revenues that are collected by individual counties, because the argument from the members of parliament is that since 2013, now in 2019, 6 years of devolution, that counties ought to have come up with mechanisms to separately also collect revenues from the counties, and therefore do not have to largely rely on allocations from the division of revenue. But the senators are saying this is not a favor that members of parliament are doing to the counties because it is in law. And there has also been a separate discussion, given the crisis in the counties, as to if the National Treasury can disburse a share of the money to the counties to deal with the crisis now as the discussions continue. And Attorney General Kihara Kariuki has spoken and said it's beyond him. It's up to Parliament to draft legislation that would necessitate or allow the National Treasury to deduct funds from the consolidated fund without a division of revenue bill in place. Brenda.
All right, thank you so much, Muremi Mwangi, a senior political affairs reporter. Muremi Mwangi talking to us about that meeting that is expected to happen this morning between senators and members of parliament when it comes to that standoff of revenue division bill. And of course, it is a conversation that, as much as we're waiting for the two members of the two houses